An arrogant duke showed up to her family dinner, and she said what no one else dared. The snow fell heavily outside the tall windows of the Ashbourne Manor. Its crystals danced like tiny stars in the pale moonlight, blanketing the gardens and the surrounding woods in a thick, white silence. Inside, the manor was warm and bright, lit by dozens of golden candles that reflected in the polished wooden floors. The aroma of roasted meats and fresh bread filled the air, mingling with the faint scent of burning pine from the hearth. Lady Eveline Ashbourne sat at the long dining table, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her dark hair was tied back simply, and her green eyes sparkled with quiet intelligence. Tonight was an important evening. Her family had gathered for the annual winter dinner, a tradition held not only for celebration, but to reinforce the Ashbournes' influence among the nobility. Guests of high rank had been invited, and the entire manor buzzed with preparation. Eveline's parents, Lord and Lady Ashbourne, moved about the table, exchanging polite conversation with their guests. Her younger siblings laughed nervously at the corner of the room, aware of the stiff formality that hovered over their parents. Everything was perfect, orderly, and calm, or so it seemed. The calm shattered when the doors at the far end of the room swung open. A chill swept through the hall, carrying more than just the cold wind from outside. A tall, broad-shouldered figure stepped inside, his black coat dusted with snow. A hush fell over the room, and all eyes turned toward him. The man was Duke Alaric Duval, the most feared and talked-about noble in the kingdom. Stories of his cunning, his ambition, and his rumored magical abilities had reached every corner of the realm. Some whispered that he had once crossed the line of dark enchantments to gain power. Others claimed he could see the truth in a person's heart with one glance. Whatever the tales, all agreed that Alaric was dangerous, and yet he stood there uninvited at the Ashbourne Manor. "Duke Alaric," Lord Ashbourne said, rising immediately from his chair. His voice was polite, but his eyes were cautious. "What an unexpected—" "I could say the same of you, Lord Ashbourne," Alaric interrupted smoothly, his deep voice filling the hall. There was a sharpness in his gaze as it fell on each guest, assessing them, weighing them, testing them. Then, finally, he looked directly at Eveline. The air seemed to thicken around them. Eveline's heart beat faster, though not with fear. There was something magnetic about the Duke, a pull that was impossible to ignore. Where others faltered or bowed, she remained seated, her chin lifted, her eyes steady. She sensed a storm behind his calm exterior, a power that could crush those around him if provoked. And yet, something in his expression hinted at hidden pain, a shadow beneath his arrogance. The room held its collective breath. No one dared speak for a moment. Then a cough from the servant seemed to break the tension, though only slightly. "My apologies for arriving without invitation," Alaric said. "I heard your family's gathering would be intriguing." His eyes lingered on Eveline as though he expected a reaction. Most of the guests stiffened. The Ashbournes prided themselves on etiquette, and an uninvited guest of such rank was a scandal waiting to happen. Whispers fluttered across the table like frightened birds, but Eveline did not falter. "I wonder," she said, her voice calm yet firm, "if all dukes find it necessary to enter homes unannounced, or if some come only when they seek attention." The room froze. Some of the older nobles gasped. Her father's jaw tightened. And yet the Duke did not look angry. Instead, the faintest smile curved his lips. It was not a friendly smile, but one that suggested amusement, curiosity, and a hint of respect. "You speak boldly," Alaric said, his gaze locked on her. "Boldly and without fear. That is rare." "I speak what I see," Eveline replied, her voice unwavering. "And I see a man who believes the world bends to his will. Perhaps not everyone agrees." A ripple of laughter passed quietly among the younger guests, though the elders frowned. Alaric's eyes darkened, and for a moment a shadow seemed to pass across his face. Then, just as suddenly, it vanished, leaving only a calm, penetrating stare. "You are different," he said quietly, almost to himself. "A rare kind. Most would tremble or bow. You do neither." Eveline did not move, but her pulse quickened. There was a dangerous tension in the room now, one that felt like the edge of a blade pressing close. The other guests avoided the Duke's gaze, their faces pale, yet Eveline met his eyes steadily, unflinching. The dinner continued, but the atmosphere had changed. The usual chatter and clinking of silverware seemed muted, almost cautious. Eveline noticed her father's uneasy glances, her mother's nervous sighs, and the whispers of the servants behind closed doors. Alaric, however, seemed entirely at ease, a predator in a gilded cage, studying his surroundings and the woman who had dared to challenge him. After the main course, Alaric rose, his presence filling the room. "I have lingered long enough to observe the spirit of this family," he said, his voice carrying through the hall. "It is lively, and yet I sense secrets, darkness behind the smiles, fears behind the eyes." A shiver ran through the room. The Duke's words were not merely observation, they carried weight, as if he could see not only the surface of things but the hidden truths beneath. Some guests shifted nervously, uncomfortable with his insight. Eveline's gaze never wavered. "Perhaps, Duke Alaric," she said softly, "some truths are best left unspoken, or perhaps you have come to see if anyone has the courage to speak them aloud." The room fell silent. The Duke's smile returned, faint but knowing. He moved closer to her, close enough that the faint scent of pine and cold air clung to him. "Indeed," he said, "and you speak with courage, or recklessness. Sometimes the difference is hard to tell." Eveline felt a strange pull, equal parts fear and fascination. He was arrogant, yes, and dangerous, but also captivating. There was a depth in him, a shadow of sorrow, and perhaps even a longing that he tried to hide behind his sharp words. The rest of the dinner passed in tense observation. Eveline could feel Alaric's eyes upon her, watching, weighing, judging. She caught glimpses of his attention flicker toward her subtle gestures, the way she placed her hands, the way she met the eyes of her family without flinching. It was as though he were mapping her courage, her spirit, and her soul. Finally, the dinner drew to an end. Alaric rose, bowing slightly to the family, though his gaze never left Eveline. "I must take my leave," he said. "But remember this, Lady Eveline, courage such as yours is dangerous. It can save you, or it can destroy everything you hold dear." With that, he turned, his long coat swirling behind him, and left as abruptly as he had arrived. The room seemed to exhale all at once, the tension leaving a faint, lingering hum in the air. Eveline's family looked at her with a mix of shock, pride, and fear. She alone had met the Duke's gaze without fear, without hesitation, and no one could predict what would come next. Eveline lingered by the window after the doors closed, staring at the storm outside. The snow had thickened, blanketing the world in white silence. And somewhere beyond the hills, she knew, the Duke's shadow still moved, unseen, powerful, and dangerous. A strange feeling settled in her chest, a mixture of fear, curiosity, and something she could not name. There was danger ahead, she knew, perhaps more than she could face alone. And yet, there was also the thrill of knowing she had seen the truth in a man who had long hidden it from the world. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft tap at the window. Eveline turned swiftly, but there was nothing there. Only the snow, swirling like restless spirits in the moonlight. She shivered, not entirely from the cold. "Courage or recklessness," she whispered softly, recalling Alaric's words. "Which will it be?" The wind howled outside, rattling the window panes, and in that moment, Eveline understood something undeniable. Her life, her family, and her world had changed forever with the arrival of the Duke, and whatever came next would not be gentle. As she gazed into the storm, a shadow passed over the snow outside, a figure tall and still, watching, waiting. Eveline could not see his face, but she felt his presence, a silent promise of challenges, revelations, and danger to come. The night seemed to stretch endlessly, and in its silence, Eveline knew one thing. She had spoken what no one else dared. And now, the consequences of that courage would begin to unfold. The next morning, the Ashbourne Manor lay quiet beneath a thin layer of frost. The snow had softened the edges of the gardens, and the sun, pale and weak, cast long shadows across the frost-covered lawn. Lady Eveline moved through the halls, her thoughts still caught in the storm of the previous night. Duke Alaric's words and presence lingered in her mind, like a shadow she could not shake. Her family had returned to their routine, but there was a noticeable tension in the air. Her father avoided her gaze, and her mother seemed distracted, busying herself with preparing letters and attending to household matters. Her younger siblings whispered softly to each other, casting curious glances in Eveline's direction. Everyone sensed that something had changed. Eveline knew that the Duke's arrival was not random. There was a purpose behind his visit, something hidden beneath the layers of his arrogance and confidence, and she could not ignore it. She wandered to the library, a vast room filled with towering shelves of ancient books and scrolls. The scent of old parchment and wax filled the air. Eveline had always loved this room. It was her sanctuary, a place where she could think, learn, and, sometimes, escape the weight of family expectations. As she reached for a book on noble lineages and old curses, a shadow moved in the corner of the room. Eveline froze, her heart beating faster. "You seem restless this morning," a voice said, deep and calm. Eveline turned sharply. Duke Alaric stood at the doorway, his dark coat dusted with snow from the previous night. His presence was magnetic, and his gaze, intense and unreadable, fell on her like a weight. "You're here," she said, her voice steady though her pulse quickened. "How did you find me?" Alaric stepped forward, closing the distance between them with an ease that was almost predatory. "I did not need to find you," he said. "You linger in my thoughts. Your courage, your words, they echo. I needed to see if you were as bold in private as in public." Eveline's lips pressed into a thin line. "And are you satisfied?" she asked, her eyes daring him to answer. "For now," he replied, a faint smile touching his lips. "But satisfaction is a fleeting thing, and I do not linger on it for long. There are matters that require attention, and you may play a part in them." Eveline tilted her head, curiosity and caution mixing in her gaze. "And what matters are those?" Alaric's expression darkened slightly. "Your family," he said. "The Ashbournes have been touched by a curse for generations. It is subtle, hidden beneath wealth and influence, but it is no less dangerous. I came because I have a role in that curse, though one I regret more than I wish to admit." Eveline's heart skipped a beat. Curses were no mere superstition in this land. They could ruin families, twist fates, and bring suffering beyond imagination. "And why tell me this?" she asked, her voice a mixture of suspicion and intrigue. "Why reveal it to me?" "Because you are different," Alaric said quietly. "You do not bow, you do not fear, and you may possess the strength to face what others cannot. The curse is awakening, Eveline, and soon it will demand more than secrets and caution." Eveline's mind raced. She had always sensed something unusual in her family, a shadow that seemed to linger behind their smiles and polite manners. But a curse? The thought made her shiver. "I do not trust easily," she said, "and I do not trust those who bring warnings wrapped in mystery." "Nor should you," Alaric replied. "Trust is earned, not given, but listen closely. The curse has been tied to bloodlines, to pride, and to choices made long ago. It cannot be broken by outsiders. Only someone who understands its depth and its pain can confront it." Eveline took a deep breath. There was fear in her chest, yes, but also a strange spark of determination. She had always believed in facing challenges directly, rather than hiding from them. And if the Duke knew more about the curse than anyone else, then perhaps this encounter was no accident. "Show me," she said finally. "Show me what I need to know. I will not ignore it." Alaric nodded, and his dark eyes softened ever so slightly. "Very well," he said. "But know this, what you will see may frighten you. It may test the courage you claim to possess, and it may reveal truths that change everything. They moved together through the manor to a hidden chamber beneath the library, a place Evelyn had never noticed before. Alaric opened a heavy wooden door, revealing a spiral staircase that led down into shadow. The air was cooler here, and the faint scent of earth and stone filled Evelyn's nose. At the bottom of the stairs, they entered a chamber lined with ancient runes and symbols etched into the walls. Candles burned in brass holders, casting flickering light that made the shadows dance like living things. At the center of the room lay a circular stone table, engraved with intricate designs. "This room has existed for centuries," Alaric explained. "It was created to study and contain the curse that haunts your family. Many have tried to understand it, but few have succeeded. The curse is not merely a misfortune. It is a reflection of the choices made by your ancestors, and it grows stronger when pride and fear dominate hearts." Evelyn studied the table and the symbols. The patterns seemed almost alive, shifting slightly in the candlelight. "And how do we confront it?" she asked. "You must first understand it," Alaric said, "and for that you must see the past." He raised his hand, and the air above the stone table shimmered. Images began to appear, like a mist forming into shapes. Evelyn saw scenes from decades past, her ancestors making decisions in moments of fear, pride, and anger. She saw their laughter, their cruelty, their mistakes, and their regrets. And she saw the consequences of those choices ripple forward through time, touching her family in ways she had never imagined. "This," she whispered. "This is all real," Alaric nodded. "It is, and it is growing stronger. Soon it will demand action, not observation. And that is where you come in. You have the courage to face it, but you must also have the wisdom to choose carefully. One wrong step, one misjudged moment, and the consequences could be devastating." Evelyn felt a mix of awe and fear. She had always known her family had secrets, but the depth of this hidden darkness was more than she could have imagined. And yet, she also felt a strange connection to the Duke standing beside her. His presence was commanding, yes, but it was also protective, as if he had been drawn to her strength even before he arrived at the manor. "Why help me?" she asked softly. Alaric's gaze softened for the briefest moment. "Because I have seen what this curse can do," he said. "And because I once made choices that worsened it. I cannot undo the past, but perhaps, together, we can change the future." Evelyn studied him, sensing the weight of his words. There was a truth there, wrapped in pride and regret. And though she would not admit it aloud, a spark of trust began to grow in her heart. For hours, they studied the chamber and the images it revealed. Alaric explained the origins of the curse, the patterns that bound her family, and the ways in which past mistakes had created the fragile line between fortune and disaster. Evelyn asked questions, and Alaric answered with patience and clarity, revealing more of himself in small, careful ways than he ever had before. By the time the sun had dipped below the horizon, the storm outside had subsided, leaving a quiet frost over the gardens. Evelyn felt both exhausted and invigorated. She had glimpsed the depth of the darkness that haunted her family, and she had begun to see the strength within herself to face it. As they ascended the staircase and returned to the library, Evelyn realized that the Duke's presence no longer felt entirely threatening. It was still magnetic, still dangerous in its own way, but it carried a new weight now, one of understanding and unspoken alliance. "I must go," Alaric said, pausing at the doorway, "but I will return. There is more to show, more to prepare for, and remember, the curse does not sleep. It waits for mistakes, fear, and pride. You must remain vigilant." Evelyn nodded. "I will, and thank you, Duke Alaric, for telling me the truth." He inclined his head slightly, and for a moment the storm within his eyes softened. "Courage and wisdom, rare qualities," he said. "Do not squander them." Then he left, and Evelyn was alone once more, the library quiet except for the whisper of the wind against the windows. She stood by the large window, looking out at the frost-covered gardens. Her thoughts were full of questions, fears, and strange anticipation. Something was coming. She felt it in her bones, and it was connected to both her family and the enigmatic Duke who had walked into their lives uninvited. The chamber beneath the library, the images of the past, and the Duke's words all swirled in her mind. Evelyn realized that her life had changed in a single evening, and that the path ahead would be filled with danger, mystery, and perhaps unexpected connection. As night fell, a shadow moved silently among the trees outside the manor. Evelyn sensed it, though she could not see clearly. The Duke's warning echoed in her mind. The curse awakens, and soon she would face a choice, one that could alter the fate of her family, her life, and perhaps the man who had drawn her into this shadowed world. In that quiet moment, with the frost sparkling like 1,000 tiny stars and the wind carrying secrets across the hills, Evelyn understood one undeniable truth. Courage was only the beginning, and the storm was far from over. The frost had melted slightly, leaving the gardens of Ashbourne Manor glistening in the morning light. Lady Evelyn walked along the stone paths, her boots crunching softly on the thin layer of ice. The events of the past 2 days weighed heavily on her mind. Duke Alaric's visit, the revelations of the hidden curse, and the strange chamber beneath the library had left her restless and uncertain. Her family moved around the manor, seemingly returning to their daily routines, but Evelyn noticed their subtle unease. Her father avoided discussing the Duke, her mother whispered cautiously with the servants, and her younger siblings cast anxious glances her way. Everyone seemed aware that something had changed, though no one could say exactly what. Evelyn paused near the fountain in the garden, the water frozen in place by the winter chill. She traced a finger along the icy surface, lost in thought. The Duke's words echoed in her mind. The curse awakens, and soon it will demand action, not observation. A sudden rustle from the hedges made her turn sharply. The wind carried a faint whisper, almost like a voice speaking from the shadows. Her heart quickened, but she reminded herself to stay calm. The Duke had warned her that the curse was not merely a story, it was real and it was awakening. "You are thinking too deeply," a voice said behind her, calm but commanding. Evelyn turned to see Duke Alaric stepping lightly onto the path, his dark coat brushing the snow. His presence always drew her attention, whether she wanted it or not. He looked at her with that same intense gaze that seemed to see more than she could show. "Why are you here again?" Evelyn asked, keeping her tone steady. "You said you would return when necessary." "I said necessary," Alaric replied, his voice quiet but firm, "and the time has come. The curse stirs faster than I anticipated, and your your safety, requires preparation." Evelyn studied him for a moment. "And what preparation is that?" He motioned for her to follow, and they walked together toward the edge of the manor grounds, where the trees of the ancient forest began. The wind whistled through the bare branches, and shadows seemed to stretch and twist in the pale sunlight. "The curse is tied not only to the past," Alaric explained, "but to choices made in the present. It tests pride, courage, and hearts that hesitate. To confront it, you must understand it fully, and to do that, you must face danger directly." Evelyn's pulse quickened. The Duke's words always carried weight, and when he spoke of danger, it was never idle talk. "What kind of danger?" she asked. Alaric's eyes darkened slightly. "The kind that cannot be ignored. The kind that forces decisions that reveal character, strength, and willpower. I will guide you, but you must walk the path yourself. One misstep could have consequences that ripple far beyond you or your family." Evelyn nodded, swallowing the nervousness rising in her chest. She had already faced much in her life: the expectations of her family, the whispers of society, the loneliness of intelligence and courage. But this was different. This was deeper, darker, and tied to forces she barely understood. They entered the forest, the air growing colder with each step. The snow crunched underfoot, and the trees loomed like silent guardians of secrets long forgotten. Alaric led her to a clearing where the snow had melted, revealing a ring of ancient stones. The stones were tall, worn by time, and etched with symbols that glowed faintly in the dim light. "This is a place of power," Alaric said, his voice echoing slightly in the clearing. "It has been used for centuries to study, contain, and sometimes manipulate the curse. Here, the past and present meet, and choices weigh more heavily than anywhere else." Evelyn stepped forward, tracing her fingers over the cold surface of one of the stones. The symbols seemed to pulse faintly beneath her touch, as if alive. "It feels strange," she said softly. "Almost like it's watching me." Alaric's gaze met hers, sharp and unreadable. "It is. The stones respond to courage, fear, and intention. They will reveal truths, test resolve, and reflect what lies hidden in the heart." Evelyn drew a deep breath. She had never been afraid of challenges, but the weight of this moment made her stomach tighten. "And how do I face this?" "You must step into the circle," Alaric said. "Let the stones show you what must be seen. Fear, pride, hesitation, all will appear. And you must remain steadfast. I will guide you, but this is your trial, not mine." Evelyn nodded, steeling herself. She stepped into the circle, feeling the cold seep through her boots and into her bones. The air seemed to thrum with energy, and the symbols on the stones glowed brighter. Shadows stretched toward her, swirling like smoke in the wind. Images appeared before her eyes, faint at first, then clearer. She saw her ancestors, making choices born of pride and fear, and the consequences of those choices rippling across generations. She saw her family in moments of weakness, secrets buried in silence, and the moments where courage might have changed the course of fate. Her chest tightened. The curse was not just magic, it was a mirror reflecting the truth of hearts, intentions, and decisions, and now it reflected hers. "You are doing well," Alaric said softly from the edge of the circle. "Do not waver. Courage is not absence of fear, it is action despite it." Evelyn clenched her fists, focusing on the visions. They were overwhelming, painful, and illuminating all at once. She saw herself making choices, facing fears, standing against consequences that had long been ignored. She realized that the curse did not punish randomly. It demanded understanding, bravery, and self-awareness. Suddenly, the visions shifted. A shadow moved within them, dark and formless, reaching toward her. The air grew colder, and the wind howled through the clearing. Evelyn's heart pounded, but she did not retreat. She remembered Alaric's words, "Courage is action despite fear." "Focus," he said, stepping closer. "Do not let the shadow control you. Face it, acknowledge it, and act." Evelyn closed her eyes briefly, centering herself. When she opened them, she stepped forward toward the shadow, reaching out with both hands. The air seemed to resist her, cold and thick, but she pressed on. The shadow wavered, then split into countless smaller forms, each representing fear, doubt, and hesitation. Evelyn confronted each one in turn, speaking aloud the truths she had learned about herself, her family, and the legacy of the curse. The stones pulsed brighter, the symbols glowing as though absorbing her words and courage. Finally, the shadow dissipated entirely, leaving only the quiet hum of the ancient circle. Evelyn's chest heaved, and her hands trembled slightly from the effort. She had faced the trial, and in doing so, glimpsed her own strength and the depth of her potential. Alaric stepped forward, his expression unreadable but his eyes sharp. "You did well," he said. "Few possess the strength to face the curse so directly. Few can endure what you have just seen and remain standing." Evelyn felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "It was difficult," she admitted. "But I understand now. The curse is not just about misfortune, it is about truth, courage, and choices. And it is tied to all of us in ways we cannot ignore." Alaric nodded. "Exactly, and now you are ready for the next step. But understand this, the curse is awakening faster than I anticipated. Forces beyond your family, beyond this manor, are stirring. You must remain vigilant. and you may find that some dangers come not from without but from within." Eveline's eyes met his. She sensed the weight of what he meant. The Duke's presence was no longer merely intimidating. It was protective, guiding, and perhaps connected to something deeper than either of them yet understood. "We must prepare," he continued. "There are others who will come, seeking advantage, power, or knowledge, and they will not care for your family's safety or the consequences of their actions. You must be ready, Eveline, not just in courage, but in wisdom and understanding." She nodded. "I will be ready. And thank you, Duke Alaric, for showing me what I needed to see." Alaric inclined his head slightly, his expression softening for a moment. "Courage is rare," he said. "Wisdom is rarer still. Do not let either be wasted." As they left the clearing and returned to the manor, Eveline felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The experience in the stone circle had tested her in ways she had never imagined. She had faced fear, doubt, and the reflection of past mistakes, and she had emerged stronger, more aware, and more determined. Yet, even as she returned to the warmth of the manor, a shadow lingered in her thoughts. The curse was still awake, still powerful, and still demanding attention. And she could feel that the Duke, for all his guidance, carried burdens of his own, burdens that might soon become entangled with hers in ways neither of them could predict. Night fell over Ashbourne Manor once more, and Eveline stood by her window, gazing out at the frost-covered gardens. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the faint echo of a warning. The curse was stirring, and the path ahead would be fraught with danger, choices, and tests that would challenge not only courage but the heart itself. Somewhere in the shadows beyond the manor, eyes watched, waiting. Eveline shivered, knowing that the storm was far from over, and that the next step in her journey, one that would test both her strength and her trust, was approaching. The night had fallen over Ashbourne Manor like a heavy velvet curtain. The wind howled through the trees, and the snow, though softened by the winter sun earlier, had returned in a thick, ghostly blanket. Lady Eveline stood at the window of her chamber, her dark hair falling over her shoulders, her green eyes fixed on the frost-covered gardens. Something was coming. She could feel it in the cold that seeped into her bones and in the restless whisper of the wind. The Duke's warning echoed in her mind. "The curse awakens. It waits for mistakes, fear, and pride. You must remain vigilant." She had spent the day preparing with Alaric. Together, they had studied the symbols, practiced rituals to strengthen protection, and reviewed everything they knew about the curse. Still, Eveline felt the weight of what was to come. She had grown stronger, braver, and more aware, but the darkness was vast, and its reach was long. A sudden knock at the door startled her. She turned to see Alaric standing in the doorway, his dark coat dusted with fresh snow and his intense eyes fixed on her. "The time has come," he said quietly. "The curse will not wait any longer. It tests not only your courage but your heart, and it may demand more than either of us anticipated." Eveline nodded, feeling the tension coil in her chest like a living thing. "I am ready," she said, though her voice betrayed the flutter of nerves within. Alaric studied her for a long moment, his eyes sharp and searching. Then he stepped closer. "You are braver than most," he said softly, "and stronger than you know. Remember, courage is not absence of fear, it is acting despite it." She met his gaze, and in that instant a bond formed, unspoken yet undeniable. They had been drawn together through danger, mystery, and shared purpose. The connection was quiet, subtle, but it carried a power that neither of them could ignore. Together they left the manor, walking toward the stone circle in the forest. The wind whipped around them, cold and sharp, but they did not falter. The path was familiar now, but each step carried the weight of what awaited them. The stone circle was alive with energy, the symbols on the ancient stones glowing faintly in the moonlight. Shadows stretched across the snow, moving unnaturally as if the curse itself was aware of their presence. "This is it," Alaric said. "The final test. The curse will reveal everything it can, the fears you hide, the pride you carry, the choices you may regret. You must face it together. Alone you cannot succeed. Evelyn swallowed, feeling a mixture of fear and determination. Then we face it together, she said. Alaric nodded. Yes, together. They stepped into the circle, and the air seemed to thrum with power. The shadows around them began to swirl, forming shapes both familiar and terrifying. Evelyn saw visions of her ancestors, the mistakes of the past, the pride and fear that had fueled the curse. She felt the weight of generations pressing on her shoulders, and yet she stood firm, knowing that retreat would only strengthen the darkness. The shadows shifted, and a darker presence emerged, a swirling mass of shadow and cold, its shape formless but menacing. Evelyn felt a chill run through her body, but Alaric's hand brushed hers, grounding her. Focus, he said. Do not let it control you. Face it, acknowledge it, and act. Evelyn took a deep breath, centering herself. She looked at the shadow, then at Alaric. She realized that the curse was not only a test of power, but a test of heart, trust, and courage. She had to act, not just with bravery, but with understanding and clarity. The shadow lunged forward, and for a moment the cold seemed unbearable. Evelyn stepped forward, her hands raised, and spoke aloud the truths she had learned over the past days, the mistakes of her family, the courage she had found in herself, and the strength she saw in Alaric. The shadow recoiled slightly, and Alaric stepped beside her, his own words joining hers. Together, their voices carried across the circle, weaving a force that was both protective and illuminating. The symbols on the stones glowed brighter, pulsing in rhythm with their hearts. The darkness seemed to waver, then split into smaller shadows, each representing fear, doubt, and hesitation. Evelyn confronted each one, naming it, acknowledging it, and refusing to let it dominate. Alaric did the same, his presence steady and unwavering beside her. Hours passed, or perhaps only moments, and finally the shadow dissipated entirely. The circle was quiet once more, the symbols glowing softly like a heartbeat. Evelyn's chest heaved and her hands trembled from the effort. She had faced the full force of the curse, and in doing so she had glimpsed the depth of her courage and the power of her heart. Alaric stepped closer, his eyes studying her. You did it, he said quietly. Few have the strength to endure what you just faced. Fewer still have emerged unchanged. Evelyn felt a mix of relief and exhaustion. We did it, she said softly, together. Yes, Alaric agreed, a rare softness in his voice. Together. For a moment they stood in silence, the weight of the night and the storm around them fading. The bond between them had grown, forged in shared challenge, trust, and understanding. There was no need for words. Their courage, their connection, and their respect for one another said more than any speech could. But even as the shadows retreated, Evelyn felt a lingering unease. The curse was weakened, but not gone. It had tested her, revealed truths, and demanded courage. But the world was full of those who would seek to exploit weakness, power, or fear. The journey was not over. Alaric turned his gaze to the horizon, where the first light of dawn began to break through the dark clouds. The curse is no longer beyond your reach, he said, but vigilance must remain. You have grown stronger, wiser, and braver. Remember that strength, for the days ahead may test it in ways we cannot foresee. Evelyn nodded, feeling the warmth of determination and quiet triumph. I will not forget, and thank you for guiding me, for trusting me, and for believing I could face this. Alaric's eyes met hers, dark and unreadable, but in them was a glimmer of something she had not seen before, pride, respect, and perhaps something softer, more human than arrogance or power. You are remarkable, he said simply, and do not mistake this for the end. The future will demand more, but I believe you can meet it. The forest around them was still, the snow sparkling under the rising sun, and for the first time in days, Evelyn felt a moment of peace. She had faced the darkness, confronted her fears, and discovered a strength she had not known she possessed. And beside her, Alaric stood, not as a threat, not as an enigma, but as an ally, a companion in the trials that still awaited. They returned to the manor together, their steps light but deliberate. The household seemed to sense the change. The air was no longer tense with unspoken fear, and the servants moved with quiet relief. Eveline's family greeted her with cautious hope, sensing that something extraordinary had occurred, though they did not fully understand what. That evening, as the manor settled into quiet, Eveline stood once more by the window, looking out at the snow-covered gardens. The first light of morning painted the world in soft gold and silver, and for the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope that the curse's shadow could be held at bay. Alaric joined her silently, standing close. She did not speak immediately, feeling the weight of unspoken words and the bond that had grown between them. "You have changed," he said finally, "not just in courage, but in understanding, in heart and in spirit. Few could face what you have and remain true to themselves." Eveline turned to him, meeting his gaze. "And you?" she asked softly. "Have you changed?" Alaric's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Perhaps," he said, "the world has a way of shaping even those who believe themselves unshakable. You have reminded me that courage and heart are as powerful as any shadow or spell." Eveline felt a warmth spread through her chest, a quiet acknowledgement of what had passed between them, the trials, the trust, and the bond that neither had expected. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying a faint echo of the past and a promise of the future. The curse was weakened, but its presence remained, a reminder that vigilance and courage would always be necessary. And yet in that quiet dawn, Eveline understood something vital. She was no longer afraid. She had faced the darkness, embraced her strength, and discovered that even in shadows there could be light, hope, and connection. Alaric's hand brushed hers gently, a simple gesture yet full of meaning. Together they had confronted the impossible, endured the trials of the curse, and found trust and understanding in one another. It was a bond forged in shadows, tested by fear and strengthened by courage. As the sun rose higher, casting light across the snow-covered manor and the forest beyond, Eveline knew that life would never be the same. There would be challenges ahead, moments that demanded bravery and choices that tested the heart. But she was ready. And beside her, Alaric stood, a companion, a protector, and perhaps something more. The frost shimmered, the wind whispered, and the world seemed to hold its breath. The curse had been faced, the shadows tested, and the courage of one young woman had illuminated a path forward. And somewhere in the quiet of the forest, a faint shadow lingered, watching, remembering, waiting. But Eveline and Alaric faced it together now, stronger than fear, stronger than doubt, and ready for whatever came next.